Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. This is one of a series of 6 webinars which EPIC are presenting this week in conjunction with Care Day, which takes place this Friday, the 19th of February. And Care Day is an international celebration of the lives of children and young people in care, in aftercare, and with care experience. And I think it's appropriate at this stage I'd mention the 4 other organisations who are part of the Five Nations One Voice Alliance with EPIC, who basically founded Care Day, and they are VOIPIC in Northern Ireland, Who Care Scotland, Voices from Care in Wales, and Become in England. So really this is, as I said, the impetus for these webinars was really to look at the issues affecting children and young people in care. I mean, through all of the research we've seen over many years, both national and international, we're aware that the outcomes for children in care still remain, for the main part, below their non-care peers in various areas. And this week we've looked at areas like education, accommodation, ethnicity, and today this Justice webinar is really looking at the issues for children in care and young people with care experience where care and justice intersect effectively. As I said, numerous international research studies have shown that the representation of children with a care background and young people with a care background in the criminal justice system is far, far higher than it should be proportionally. One UK study showed, and it was a Scottish study incidentally, showed that up to 30% of all young offenders and 30% of adults in adult prison population self-identified as having care experience. And because this was a self-identification piece, the researchers felt that the numbers could be much, much higher than that. In 2019, the Irish Penal Reform Trust independently commissioned exploratory research on the connections between the care system and the justice in Ireland. And one of the things that came through that piece of research was effectively the lack of data in Ireland on the extent to which children and young people with care experience come into contact with the criminal justice system. I think it's probably worth saying at this stage that that lack of data has been a constant theme through the webinars we've run this week in areas like education, which we ran yesterday, significant lack of data on the outcomes of children and young people in education, both primary, secondary and third level, but also in terms of accommodation and homelessness, addiction. That particular study by the IPRT also made 12 recommendations, and 2 of those recommendations I think are very important to state at this stage. One was that a joint protocol aimed at addressing the involvement of children in care with the criminal justice system would be developed by the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, as it was at the time, Irish Youth Justice Service, with the involvement of An Garda Síochána and TUSLA. And the other one of the 12 recommendations was that TUSLA should develop a mechanism to systematically record and report on the numbers of children in care and those with care experience in receipt of aftercare services coming into contact with the criminal justice system. So they were just 2 of 12 recommendations made around the whole issue of children in care with care experience and the criminal justice system. So in this particular webinar this morning, we'll hear from a number of professionals working in a number of areas, including care, youth justice, social policy, and research. And really they'll be discussing their work and the issues arising from that from the perspective of the Irish care system and its intersection with justice generally and the criminal justice system. Throughout this, we'll also have, I'm happy to say, input from members of the EPIC Youth Council, who will give their perspective on the issues from their own lived experience of care, which I think is always an important piece and gives us a different view maybe than we'd normally have. The content for this particular piece has been drawn together by Jessica Duffy, who's a member of our EPIC Youth Council, so thanks to you, Jessica, and also Peter Lane and Adele Weldon, who are advocates with EPIC. Peter and Adele have many, many years experience in providing visiting advocacy services to both Oberstown and to Doka's Women's Centre, so they're pretty well versed in this area as well. And I suppose really what we're trying to do in this webinar is effectively to bridge the gap between the reality and perception of effectively why it is that so many children and young people with care experience intersect and come into contact with the criminal justice system particularly, and the justice system generally in terms of looking to have their rights upheld in those areas. I think the issues that we'll explore through this will include such things as the contributory factors. In other words, why is it that so many children and young people proportionally do basically intersect and come into contact with the criminal justice system. What is being done or what can be done to address some of the issues as to why this happens, and maybe what are some of the barriers that arise in trying to address, these issues. Now, the webinar, generally to kick off, we'll have a number of pre-recorded pieces, 3 in all, and then at the end of to finish the webinar, we'll have a live panel discussion. So I'll introduce the various speakers and presenters and contributors, I think, as we move through each piece today, rather than introduce them all now and reintroduce them. But I want to thank them all in advance for their participation, for the work they've done in preparing the webinar. I also want to say that for you as participants, there will be an option to send in questions and to pose questions to us. So if you have questions or comments you want to make, suggestions or observations, please do that. You can pose questions right through the webinar, and questions for the live panel discussion at the end as well. I also just would ask you, if you're posting on social media, if you would help us. We're using the hashtag CareDay21. That would be great, because we are trying to continue to raise awareness of Care Day and the purpose and the theme of Care Day. So hashtag CareDay21 would be fantastic if you could use that if you're using social media. So I think that's effectively a summary of what we're trying to do through this webinar and what you'll be seeing today. So without further ado, I will briefly introduce myself again. My name is Terry Dignan. I'm the former CEO of EPIC, and now in the process of handing over to our new CEO, Marissa Ryan, who I know is joining us on the webinar today. And want to take this opportunity, because this is my last webinar presentation, to wish Marissa all the luck in the world in taking EPIC forward, which I know she'll do a fantastic job in. So we are now going to move to a piece, a pre-recorded piece, which is a piece by Mr. Damien Hernon. Damien is the Interim Director of Oberstown Children Detention Campus. Damien has huge experience in the area of youth justice and in the area of youth work generally. He has been Interim Director since 2020 of the youth campus. He has huge knowledge and a very wide experience of the youth justice landscape generally, but also from a strategic and an operational point of view. I think in his current role, Damien is effectively committed to building on the ethos of Oberstown, using the platform that's there to guide and further the development of Oberstown in an inclusive way, with the voice of the young people in Oberstown and also the staff involved in the future development and ongoing development of Oberstown, and really developing the ethos that is inclusive of both staff and young people and the other professionals who work with young people in Oberstown. So in this piece, Damien is really going to talk about Oberstown, the ethos of Oberstown, and his own work there. So I'll hand over to Peter to run that now. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to attend this webinar today. I'm on behalf of the Oberstown campus. The Oberstown campus relationship with IAPIC, as it used to be known, the Irish Association of Young People in Care, goes back maybe 12 years at this point. And I suppose from an Oberstown perspective, the voice of the young person has always been really important in terms of the development of the campus, in what we do for the young people and how we deliver our services to them. Because our ultimate aim with any young person who comes through the doors of Oberstown is to help them maximise their potential during the time they spend with us. Myself, I have 30 years experience in this industry, I suppose, and I count myself to be very privileged and honoured to be in this position of the interim director at this point in time, because this gives me an opportunity to represent the campus at a national and an international level with regard to policy and practice in terms of improving the lives of the young people that come through the campus. What I hope to do today is take you through some of the systems, the processes and the people who are involved on the Oberstown campus, and how we encourage the young people to find their voice from a detention perspective. Some of the key drivers throughout the years have been the development of an advocacy officer and the routines, rhythms and rituals that encompass the Oberstown campus. And this is something we can discuss later on when we get to it. So the first thing we're going to consider is what is the Oberstown campus? What makes up the Oberstown campus? And I suppose this organogram that we're looking at, it's slightly outdated because the department has changed in recent months, and we are currently in the process of developing a new organogram. But what you see there is a highly populated, a well-populated organogram which contains in or around 300 staff at any given time to cater for 48 young men and for 6 young ladies. Now, generally when I say 300 people, there's a big intake of breath, there's a big deep sigh to say, God, that's an awful lot of staff. But when one considers what we do on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it's adequate staff, and one might argue, to look after the needs of perhaps one of the most marginalised groups in society. We are completely self-contained, from catering to household, to maintenance, to security, to education, to staff, to every aspect of the work that goes on. The system has a director and different heads of departments at deputy director level throughout the campus. In the last 8 weeks, we've been fortunate enough to appoint heads of departments and heads of programs and heads of residential who will have a real impact with the development of placement plans and programs, and we'll discuss this as we go through the presentation today, I suppose. So that's just a flavour of what the staff who work in the Oberstown campus. It's a 60+ acre site out in North County Dublin, surrounded by agriculture as the main industry, but we also have a very important community connection there with the locals who live out there. So we work in partnership with the Man o' War Senior Citizens Committee, if that makes sense, from a Meals on Wheels perspective, and every year there's an annual Christmas event that the young people contribute to in terms of gifts for the senior citizens. They are currently making mini chocolate biscuit cakes for up to 70 or 80 members of the senior citizen community that live around us. So because we have this internal community of Oberstown that lives in this wider community of the Man o' War, as it's known, it's important that these relationships are developed and maintained on an even keel. And the young people are key to that, I suppose. So we talk about this journey, our journey through care, and every single one of us is on a journey through life. Those of you in attendance today, those of you who are watching this have made the decision to attend this webinar, I suppose. You've made the decision to make this journey. I've made the decision today to make this journey to present this presentation on behalf of the Oberstown campus. And all the young people in our campus are also on a journey. The difference with their journey is that they're not in the Oberstown campus of their own choice, of their own free will. They're there because they've offended, they're there because they've caused harm, but often the young people that we deal with are often victims of circumstance. They're often suffered major traumatic incidents themselves, and their involvement in the world of offending or the world of crime is perhaps sometimes about esteem, perhaps sometimes about status in their own community. So they are very much victims of circumstance. And when we talk about the journey, they come in at point one, and we have this JTC1, as we call it, within a couple of days. But from the very minute a young person gets a detention order on campus, we're looking at their discharge date, and we're working backwards to help them realise and maximise their potential throughout that period of time. What's on this slide here, the journey through care, I'm going to take you through that on an individual basis here, but as you can see from it, it's not a linear process. It's a lumpy, bumpy, curvy road, and that's what it will be for many of the young people who come through the campus. Things don't happen automatically. Things don't happen in straight lines. Sometimes there are hiccups, but through our placement planning process, what we can do is, on a 6 to 8 week frequency, we can measure the assessed needs and the progress the young person is taking. And that's ultimately what our placement planning does. It's a sit rep with regard to the progress the young person has made since they've come onto the campus. It's a fairly busy, it's a fairly professional, formal engagement. It's multidisciplinary, it's interagency. We have internal stakeholders such as the young people, the key workers, the unit managers, family. We have external stakeholders such as Nicola, YAP, FCAMS, ACTS, and from time to time independent advocacy for the young people. And I suppose that when we consider the history that the state has with regards to looking after young people in terms of the poor history throughout the years, it's very important throughout this placement planning process that the young people are at the centre of the placement planning process. If we think of Matilda, and I think it's Trunchbull, is it that I'm big, you're small, I'm right, you're wrong. That mentality is gone and has no place in the world of social care within which we operate. The young person is at the centre of the decision making, and their voice is really important in terms of this placement planning process. So they're a key member of this. They, from time to time, they will contribute from a written report or a verbal report. And like I said, it is in a formal setting. It's in a boardroom. Our head of programmes chairs the meeting, and the rationale behind that is that the head of programmes also has an overview on the assessed needs of the young people through our outcome star, and then we have a suite of programmes that the young people can dip in and out of to help them meet the needs, understand why they've arrived in Alberstown, and ultimately help them realise and maximise their potential when they move on from us. So the frequency, so we have remand young people, we have detention young people. The remand young people, it's typically within 72 hours the first placement plan for both sets of individuals. And this is just a quick measure of who are the key people involved in your life, are there any key issues you need to be concerned of, and we get a very limited picture of what this young person is about. We expand that then within a number of weeks to create a fuller picture, and then, like I've said previously, the rhythm of the placement planning meeting is normally every 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks is ample opportunity for young people to see how their assessed needs are being met, to see what progress is being made in the different areas that we address through our placement planning process. So within a placement planning process, we work off what we call our Keyhop Framework. And this is something we developed ourselves on the campus, and it's a hard C as opposed to a soft C. And the different elements of it are care, education, health, offending behaviour, and preparation for discharge. So through a process of engagement and consultation on the campus and off the campus, these are the 5 elements that we arrived at, which probably encompass all the needs of the young people who come through the campus. So from a placement planning perspective, we get an overview of where they are from their care assessed needs, their educational assessed needs, their health assessed needs, their offending behaviour assessed needs, and their preparation for discharge needs. And out of that then we build a programme that's individual to each young person, because it's not, one model doesn't fit all, or one solution doesn't fit all. So if we take education, for example, it's a very sad fact that the majority of the young people who come through our doors have been out of education for a significant period of time. So what we know is there's a deficit in education in relation to numeracy and literacy. For some young people, learning how to read and write will be a significant achievement. For other young people, they'll sit their leaving cert. For other young people, they'll go to college. And this, in terms of the work that the staff do on campus out in Alberstown, it's really important that the voice of the young person is heard in relation to what their future looks like in terms of what they want to do when they leave us. So this model of care around care, education, health, offending behaviour and preparation for discharge is really important, and it sets the tone because it's the holistic view of the young person, not the singular piece. Because if we were to focus only on one piece, we'd be missing 70 or 80% of the rest of that young person, and their assessed needs wouldn't be effectively met. the reason we come up with this, because a number of years ago, I suppose, the campus amalgamated 4 schools, children's detention schools, into one, and each school had a different way of managing care, I suppose. So this gives us a framework that's bound in theory and solid practice, and has really made a positive contribution into where the young people are going and how they're getting there. We are currently at the point of trademarking the Keyhop name, not to monetize it, but it might be useful in terms of international best practice, national best practice, as a model for other companies or other organisations to use who work with young people. So discussed there earlier on the specialist programmes that are on offer to help young people not only understand the behaviour that caused them to offend, but also to help them map out the rest of their journey from when they leave Oberstown. Throughout the placement planning process, the assessed needs will identify, I don't know, victim empathy, sexual awareness, the Real You programmes or whatever. But part and parcel of the young person's voice finding its way into the feedback loop, as we call it, of virtual improvement. What's come to the fore in recent years is the need for a different type of education, the need for a different type of training, and I suppose getting young people ready for the world of work and life beyond Oberstown. So there's been a couple of significant developments in recent years with industry leaders, creating partnership with industry leaders. We have a partnership with Java Republic, who are a coffee company in Ballycool, Dublin 15. We have a partnership with Image Fitness, who are based out of Swords, who deliver fitness training to young people on campus. Java Republic deliver barista training. We have Safe Pass programs in place. And most recently this year, we've developed our motor mechanics course. The aim for the motor mechanics course is to build it slowly, but ultimately you're building towards pre-apprenticeship courses and work experience, which will help people in the world of work. When we consider that the world of the barista or the fitness trainer or the motor mechanic, these are, and Safe Pass, these are industries that people from all walks of life can easily transition into. So our challenge from an education perspective is to give them the relevant accreditation and skills that will help the young people maximise their potential when they leave campus. And when I talk about feedback loops and the voice of the young people, some of these initiatives have come from the young people. And it's our job as leaders or as managers to pay attention to what the kids are saying, because ultimately this will have a positive impact on them. I'm going to take you through some of the key people who work on the campus, I suppose, and we talk about the unit managers here for a moment, and some of the key areas that we'd be considered with unit managers would be the first 2 bullets on that slide, and it's in relation to leadership and management. They're 2 very different functions. Managers make sure things are done right. Leaders make sure we do the right thing. So on the Oberstown campus, we promote this leadership notion from all levels of people on the campus, from the young people upwards. We're looking for leaders throughout the campus, people who will do the right thing, people who will have the courage and the bravery to do the right thing in relation to what's necessary in order for these young people to maximise their potential. That takes a certain amount of courage and bravery, and we need to support people to do this. We need to support the young people, and we need to support the staff to do this. Michael Jordan didn't become the best basketball player in the world by not trying. Michael Jordan missed more shots than he actually scored, and he has said this. In China, their business model talks about try, fail quickly, try again, fail quickly. So unless we step out of our comfort zones, unless we try something, unless we try and affect change in the right way for the young people, the staff, the organisation, the community that we're engaged in, we aren't fulfilling our objectives. So this is where we want to get with from a leadership perspective throughout the campus, and it's at every layer. And And it's really important. And beyond that then, the unit manager has the much more mundane tasks of making sure the place is staffed, making sure key workers are doing what they're supposed to do, and making sure that young people are being looked after. I suppose the word unsung hero has been thrown around a lot in the last couple of months, and throughout the last couple of months, our residential social care workers have continued to come into work. They've continued to provide the service that the young people need, and they've continued to help young people find their voice, help young people maximise their potential throughout their engagement with not just the young people, their families and the wider external audience. So they're a key part of the process that goes on the campus. And when we talk about assessed needs, I suppose, a number of years ago, from a health perspective, what we saw were young people who typically had body lice, head lice, athlete's foot, scabies, all this sort of stuff coming into us from a health need. The biggest health need we've identified in recent years is dental stuff. And rightly or wrongly, I suppose, a number of months ago, a young person was struggling with the dentist and seeing the dentist. They'd never seen their dentist in their life before. They really wanted their teeth to have some work because they didn't like the pain, they didn't like the taste, the odour, they didn't like how they looked, but they hadn't got the courage to attend the dentist. So in terms of trying to help this young person find their way from a health needs, their key worker, rightly or wrongly, called them aside and said, I was like you, once upon a time I was petrified of dentists, I hated dentists, I neglected my teeth for a long, long time. And I suppose ultimately they said, watch this. They took out their teeth and they said, this is what's happened to me because I didn't look after my teeth. They put their teeth back in and they said, at 40 years of age, I had a full set of dentures put in because I never looked after my teeth. That young person skipped into the dentist and within a 6-week period was very proud to be seen showing off their shiny white pearls. Now, one might argue that the care staff took a step too far in that regard, but these are the measures that some of the people on the campus go to make sure the voice, the needs of the young people are met. And that young person has had their dental needs looked after and is walking around with a big smile on their face now, as opposed to covering their teeth with their lips like lots of us have done in the past. And it's just a small example of the depth and the level of the work that the care staff do to help the young people find their way to address their needs and meet their needs. In the last couple of years, we've been very fortunate, I suppose, to create a post called our advocacy officer. And this came out of a conversation between myself and the previous director around how do we make sure kids' voices are heard in the organisation? How do we make sure it doesn't get lost? And what do we need to do around this? So we said we'd create this role of an advocacy officer. Internally on campus, we had an expression of interest, and we were very fortunate in that a lady called Grania Smith was successful in the campaign. And she's taken the bull by the horns and she's run with this, and she's created a really good process whereby young people's voices are really included in Alberstown campus in the development towards that creation of a virtuous cycle of improvement. True. Okay, so there you are, a snapshot of what life in Alberstown looks like. I hope it gives you some insight into the fabric, the environment and the culture that we're trying to create on the campus. And some of the conversation that we've had throughout the last 15 minutes makes sense now from a visual perspective. So on behalf of all the young people and the staff who have ever worked or ever contributed to the Alberstown campus, I'd like to thank you very much for the attention you've given me here today. And any questions that you may have, feel free to email me at any point, and we can catch up at that after that. And so thank you very much. Sinead.
So I want to thank Damien for that piece. I know Damien is joining us today, so thanks, Damien. A really, really powerful piece. I think in many ways, and I have previous experience of working in what was probably the old Oberstown Trinity House, which Damien will remember. Oberstown is indicative maybe of the care system generally, in that we tend to hear about it or Oberstown when there's an issue, but we don't hear often enough about the amazing work that goes on there, the very complex work that goes on with those young people. I thought it was interesting in the terminology Damien used. He talked about the journey and the rhythm for young people, building a rhythm into their lives, putting a structure into their lives. I think the whole issue around education, considering that, as Damien said, a lot of these people would have had a fractured education or been out of education for a long period of time, may have learning difficulties. I think putting those structures in place are key to, the positive outcomes that we see for so many young people, exiting out of Oberstown. But I think there are other probably important pieces in that as well. I think, the excuse me, the external stakeholder piece, engaging with the local community, is really, really important for these young people and for Oberstown itself as an organisation. And that community connection, I think, is really, really important. But most of all, it's when Damien spoke to the voice of the young people, the actual, I suppose, the empowerment that is given to them in determining outcomes for themselves and determining what they want to do and how they want to do it, not just in terms of education and training, but just in basically the rhythm of their day-to-day lives. I think, that whole young person-centered approach that is part of the ethos Oberstown is so important in, I suppose, re-engaging those young people, re-empowering those young people, giving them the confidence to move forward, and the resilience to move forward as well in what can often be very, very difficult lives that some of these young people have experienced before they came to Oberstown. So I think it's testament to the work in Oberstown of what's happening for those young people and how many of them are basically coming out of Oberstown to move on to very, very successful, productive lives. And I want to thank Damien and all of the staff in Oberstown for the work they continue to do. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to a piece now which includes Damien again, but also two of our Epic Youth Council, Angel Marger and Dylan Nolan, but also the Ombudsperson for Children, Dr. Niall Muldoon. And this is a panel discussion on some of the issues around, children with care experience and the justice system. But I just want to talk for a moment about Dr. Niall Muldoon as the Ombudsperson for Children. Niall was appointed in 2015 as the second Ombudsperson for Children in Ireland. And over the past number of years, and we in EPIC would have worked closely with Niall and his office. I suppose the work that's been done there has been really, really important. I know Niall himself has said that really, his key focus has been basically engaging with children, and particularly the most vulnerable children, creating, I suppose, an Ireland where the voice of young children is heard, particularly voices that aren't typically heard or listened to, those most vulnerable within our society as children. I know a significant amount of work has been done by Niall and his team in engaging with children through CAMS, the mental health services, also in direct provision centres, family hubs, children in hospital. So the ethos and the focus has been on hearing what children themselves have to say, listening to their voices, responding positive to their voices through the office. So Niall, by background, is a practicing counselling and clinical psychologist. So obviously that has helped him. And I know prior to being appointed as Ombudsperson for Children, he was also a head of investigations for the Ombudsperson for Children's Office. So a huge range of knowledge, a huge amount of experience, but a huge task as well as the Ombudsperson for Children in Ireland. So I want to pass over now to this discussion between Niall, Damien and Angel and Dylan around some of the issues that we have discussed and will continue to explore today. So I'll pass it over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Angel and I hope you're all having an amazing care day. We're now going to have a panel discussion about injustice in relation to care leavers and young people in care. So I think, Damien, I'm going to hand it over to you because you have a lot of experience in that area.
Thank you very much, Angel. I suppose from a justice perspective, and we spoke about some of this in the green room beyond there earlier on, if we look at the state of the nation 100 years ago, say if you take a trip to Kilmainham jail and look at the records there, you will see young people at 6, 7, 8 years of age being transported to Australia, to New Zealand, to Barbados, to different points of the world for stealing a loaf of bread, for stealing a bag of turf, for stealing a bag of logs, to feed their family or to look after their family. Throughout the 40s and 50s then and the 60s, we're all aware of the activities associated with Letterfrack and Artane and all the different institutes that young people were looked after throughout the ages. Up until maybe 12 or 15 years ago, there were 4 separate children's detention schools looking after young people. And that's been amalgamated into one campus now, which has capacity for 54 young people. In the 40s and 50s, there were thousands of young people in detention in Ireland for simple crime of non-attending school. Under the 1908 Children's Act, truancy was an offence punishable by detention. And that happened to young people. That legislation was in place right up until the 40s into the early 2000s, 2001, the Children's Act completely revised that. And the whole thrust of the legislation was then that the child is at first, is the centre of everything, and only those who really need to be detained will be detained and for the shortest time possible. So we've gone from a position where there were thousands of young people in detention for small minor offences to where we now currently have capacity for up to 54 young people under the age of 18 to be in detention. So what that means is the young people who are in detention in the main need to be in detention because of the nature of the crimes they've committed. What it also means is that the different organs of the state are working really well to help divert people from detention, divert people into the guarded diversion programs, the JLO programs, the different community initiatives that are outside there. And that's been a big move in terms of the state. So we have a responsibility as a state and as an organisation to look after these young people, because because they've been judged and they've been detained for a period of time doesn't mean they'll be forgotten about, because our challenge while they're with us on the campus is to help them maximise their potential. Some of the stuff we've discussed this morning in terms of accommodation, education, LGBTQ membership, this covers all members of the community, whether they're in the Oberstown campus or outside communities. So these are challenges that we're all faced with. I suppose part of the campus objectives over the next number of years is to strive towards excellent service delivery, so that every young person that comes through the place has their whole set of needs assessed and their whole set of needs met, in order that we can prepare them fully to reintegrate back into society and help them maximise their potential. For some young people, that will be going to college, and whatever support we can provide to do that, we will do. We face challenges from an aftercare perspective, we face challenges from an accommodation perspective, but some young people are very fortunate to have the support networks in place. And as we alluded to earlier on in some of the conversations, as long as those networks and those communities are firm and are solid, young people have a chance. If those networks become fractured, if they become, located all around the country, if they move from placement to placement to placement, that sense of community, that sense of network becomes lost, and the capacity then to lead a meaningful life becomes more difficult. So I suppose from a justice perspective, in the last century, there's been huge moves in relation to how we look after young people. There's a line in the 1908 Act, I think it's section 152 or something like that. If a child is deemed to be so unruly and depraved that they can be removed to prison. So up until very recently, young people under the age of 16 could be moved to prison because a judge decides that they're unruly and depraved. Thankfully, all that language is gone out of legislation now. And for young people to get into detention, it's difficult, and it should be difficult. because it should be the last resort if we value the young people that are coming through the state. So that's it from a justice perspective, I suppose.
Do you think that maybe as young people in care and care leavers, because that is what we're focusing on, there's a major discrimination in terms of justice and crime and how that's seen, and perhaps young people in care kind of are stereotyped as the bad eggs, and they're most likely to, you know, commit a crime or not lead the type of life that should be led.
So Niall will remember some of this, or will be aware of some of this. There, you know, I'm going to say back in the 90s now, and when you get older, your memory starts to fade. But that's okay. That's ahead of you. Somewhere back in the 90s, there was a trend where possibly young people in care were being criminalised for behaviour in care. It was addressed and it was identified as something that should not happen. Judge Peter Kelly got involved and created different services for young people that could be managed and that. So we cannot create a situation whereby somebody in care is becoming criminalised because of the behaviour in care, and then they get shunted into the justice system, and maybe sometimes the two systems won't talk then. Although there's this principle whereby there should be involvement throughout the process, sometimes that's not always the practice, and it presents a challenge. So we have to be very mindful in our efforts to make sure that the right population of young people are held in detention and managed in detention, and the right population of young people are managed through the care system. And it shouldn't be accepted, or it shouldn't be a standard that because perhaps I'm in care, the next step might be that I go to detention. Young people are in care because of a multitude of issues and problems and complexities. And part of the challenge is, as Niall alluded to earlier on, if the state is the corporate parent, well then the responsibility is to meet those challenges and those needs and those behaviours. Not to say, actually, we're going to charge you with criminal damage because you broke a window, and then you might end up in somewhere like Overstown, because that's not right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And perhaps Damien, Niall, Dylan even, I have recently had a class about the Garda Youth Diversion Programmes and JLOs, and maybe even in different areas where there's inconsistencies in the ways that adults and the people that are in those jobs address young people in care and kind of handle those issues, because one person might look at perhaps the challenges that young person is facing and their situation, whereas another person might just see their crime. How do you think that could be addressed?
Well, I suppose from my point of view, I think there's two things. One, I want to, the history lesson in regards to children coming out of prisons and into Overstown and bringing down the numbers is fantastic. It's, you know, one of the things I did set as a goal back when I became Ombudsman in 2015 was to get all children out of Mountjoy and then out of Clondalkin. So it's really, that's how recent it was. The people were in adult prisons. You know, so we really have made a big strides forward. We're now looking, Overstown is now built around children's rights, and the child is the centre of the decision making. So it's rehabilitation and it's care and it's trying to prevent reoffending. So that's fantastic. The JLO system, I think, is a huge plus to our country, but I do think there's inconsistencies as well, as you say. But I think the key thing here is the care system. It's the word care, and I think we forget that often enough, because again, I would challenge anyone who thinks that it's the child's fault within the care system if they go wrong. If you brought any child into a system where you're moved 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 times, to me there should be a big red light that goes up. If a child is moved a third time within 10 years, it's on us then to try and prevent that ever happening again. It's on us to put in all the systems that child needs. Because if you move multiple times, then it is so much harder to be secure, to be safe, to feel trust, to feel that other people will trust you in the future, to make mistakes that you will normally make anyway, and not be challenged on them in a different way. So I think, as Damien says, the care system has to provide that support, that pillow of comfort to the child and the young person. And the foster parents do that, but if you're now the 6th or 7th or 8th foster parent, that becomes harder for you as well, because the child is reacting not to you, but to everything else previously. And unless we wrap around that child earlier and prevent those moves happening and create that security and that certainty that no matter what you do, we're still going to be here for you, then the justice system is going to be an option for them. Not because they want to, but because that's where they feel, and that's a human feeling. It's not because they're in care, it's where they feel that's where I'm going to go and that's where I'm going to belong, and I get some sort of power out of controlling the stuff by breaking rules. And we should be able to be big enough and adult enough to recognise that in the child and not blame the child for it. And that's where we need to really look at ourselves and explore that with, whether it's JLO, whether it's a care worker, whether it's a foster parent. What have we done that has led the child to this situation, not what the child has done to do this. And again, we've got to keep that in mind all the time. And again, what we always say, just put the child, what's in the best interest of the child here? Yeah. Not what's in the best interest of me or the system or the justice. What's the best interest of Mary or Jane or Michael? And that's crucial. And if we can keep doing that more and more times, it should start to reduce the number of children who end up in the justice system.
I think that's so very important, actually addressing what the issues are around the child rather than the child themselves. I know myself, I've personally been moved through a ton of placements when I was younger, and a lot of the time it was, you've done this, you were acting out because you didn't get to see your parents. And you know, that situation was blamed on me, and I think growing up, you do feel like you're the problem. And I think that leads a lot of young people in care to actually commit crimes or, you know, have bad relationships with the justice system. And I think addressing the issue rather than the child as an issue is just so important. So thank you.
Just and as leaders, I suppose, and myself and Niall are privileged to be in those positions in what we do, I suppose. Sometimes you've got to move from a systems and a process world into a human world, and you've got to try and understand what's going on for people, and you know, what's the saying, walk a mile in my shoes or whatever. Put yourself in the young person's shoes and try and understand actually what's going on, because lots of time I haven't a clue, because the complex set of needs that exist. So that's really important. The how of what we do is really important, and the more we can get that onto a national agenda, a national discussion around how we do this, how we communicate, how we liaise, how we link, how we manage, how we look after, they're really important questions to ask. To your earlier point, and it brings me back to something Daniel alluded to earlier on, sometimes the rural and the urban divide is very plain to be seen from a justice world. We have enjoyed a good level of success from an urban perspective, I suppose, with regard to influence to the judiciary. And it's helpful that the Children's Court is located centrally in Dublin, so that helps. But what might be deemed a crime suitable to land someone in Alberstown in the Children's Court in Dublin City Centre versus Tormakeedy in County Sligo or something like that is very different. And it's down to the big fish, small pond, or small fish, big pond. And that's a challenge we face on a national basis. We see young people from rural environments whose level of offending is really insignificant. And you have to question, what is it they're doing on the Alberstown campus, where you know of young people in an urban setting whose offending of a significant nature, but they don't end up in the Alberstown campus. So that creates a divide, and it's no different to the rural-urban divide in relation to LGBT, accommodation, homelessness, all those things. They apply across the country. So the challenge then is from my perspective, from a detention perspective, is to influence the judiciary around putting the child at the centre of this. And to Niall's point earlier, if the kids are at the centre of the issue here, how best do we manage this young person? How best do we look after that young person? And all the interventions have proven to be really successful. We need to intervene earlier though. We need to bring it back a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, because then you prevent the long-term, the potential long-term damage to self and to society. So that's...
I think a preventative approach is definitely something that needs to be taken, especially now with COVID and things like that. Even there's so many struggles during this pandemic, and I think in terms of accommodation, in terms of justice, in terms of all of these challenges that young people are facing, a preventative approach needs to be proactive, and it needs to be put in place. And I think Dylan and I can attest to the voices of those in care and care experienced individuals being heard and being in the room, and being what's used to make the decisions higher up. So I think we've had a brilliant discussion on justice, and there was so many clear points made about the challenges. So I hope you all have an amazing care day, and thank you.
Again, another very absorbing discussion. You'd like to hear, that group talking for another half an hour or more on that. I think a lot of very interesting points raised on that for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people who have tuned into this. I was particularly struck by, Damien's piece on the 1908 Act and the progress we've made since then, which is undeniable. But I think, Niall, in speaking to the fact that there's so much more progress to be made is the key issue there. There were a couple of really pertinent issues there in terms of separating the child from the behaviour, looking at the causes of the behaviour rather than assuming it's the child. And Niall referred to placement breakdowns and things, which adds to the trauma of children in care and does lead, as Angel mentioned, to acting out behaviour, which is then seen as the issue for the child, the problem for the child, rather than a systemic issue that is effectively played out through the behaviour of the child. I think another really important one, and one I think we've all learned through our careers, is it's not just what we do, it's how we do it. It's not just what we put in place within the childcare system, it's how we basically manage all of that. It's our approach to doing that. And I think really important point as well that Damien brought up is consistency. And we in EPIC have seen that continually, consistency in how, I suppose, protocols and policies are interpreted. Damien made the point around the rural-urban divide. I, in my career, have seen that, children ending up in Oberstown or Trinity House for relatively minor offending pieces in comparison to other children in the same campus for much more serious pieces. And again, that comes down to a lack of consistency, a lack of general oversight systemically, system-wide. And I think that's something that has to be addressed continually, has to be addressed, because we are still seeing that level of inconsistency in how policies are applied to interpret, protocols are applied to interpret by professionals across the country. So I think that that's an important piece in how we view, I suppose, the offending behaviour of children, putting the child at the centre, listening to what the child has to say, and also removing or separating the behaviour of children from the child, him or herself, I think is really critical of that. So again, a really nice piece and a really powerful piece from the panel. We're going to move to another pre-recorded piece, and this is again a discussion around justice generally. One of our own youth council members, Jessica Duffy, features in this, but also 2 professionals in the area of justice. Judge John O'Connor is a judge in the circuit court, and he has extensive practical and academic experience in dealing with vulnerable children, particularly. He was a judge for 6 years in the district court, and he is principal judge in the children's court in Smithfield. The other person joining Jessica with John is Gareth Noble. Now, Gareth is recognised as one of the leading litigators in Ireland. I have to say, recognise Gareth as a former member of EPIC's board as well, and we thank him for all the work he and support he gave us as an organisation. But he has successfully represented many families in challenging law and respective services for children, particularly in the areas of disability and education, but also in the area of care. he basically acts in education case law for children and families in respect of things like school bullying, school admissions, and other areas, but has extensive experience of children and the law. And Jessica will introduce herself, but is currently at Inchicore College of Further Education studying social care. So this is a young woman, again, who has come through the care system, and like many young people we've seen who've come through the care system, has gone into becoming a professional within the care system to use their own lived experience of that, I suppose, to benefit other young people that they will work with. So with no further ado, I'm going to move to this piece. Thank you, Peter.
So I'm 19 years old. I'm currently studying social studies in Inchicore College. I'm in my second year. I hope to one day actually work for TUSLA in child protection. I've went through the system.
Yeah, oh great. And how did you find it?
It had its good moments and it had its bad moments, but overall, like looking back, it has made me into the person I am today.
Hi there, my name is Gareth Noble. I'm a former board member of EPIC and I'm a children's rights solicitor. I am really pleased to be part of this really important discussion as part of your Care Day celebrations in 2021, and I'd particularly like to offer my congratulations to Jessica Duffy for all the work that she has put into this webinar and for highlighting a really important set of issues. I'm here to answer a couple of questions that Jessica has sent to me on the relationship of children in the care system and the criminal justice system. And the first question is, do you believe that there are a disproportionate number of young people in care going through the justice system? And the answer to that is sadly yes. I think there have been recent studies completed by Nicola Carr and her colleagues that there are a disproportionate number of children in the care system who also find themselves in the criminal justice system, and we might explore in a few moments why that might be.
Yeah, my name is Nicola Carr and I'm an Associate Professor in Criminology in the University of Nottingham, and with my colleague Paula Mayock I've done research on young people in care and the criminal justice system. The study that we did in Ireland certainly found that there was evidence of more young people from the care system and the criminal justice system than we would expect to see compared to young people in the general population. There is a problem with a lack of proper data in this area, but what we did find from data produced by Oberstein Children's Detention School was that there was significant numbers of young people with care experience within the children's detention school system and also going through the courts.
I know that you worked in the children's court. Could you tell me a little bit about that line of work?
Well, I'm a judge now for just over 8 years, and I was originally appointed in 2012, and then in 2013 I was appointed to or assigned to the Children's Court, which is in Smithfield. It's Ireland's only court that solely deals with juvenile justice, and I was there for 6 years. So I had good experience in relation to all the work that was there, so I got to see everything really in relation to cases involved in that. And then 2 years ago I was appointed to the Circuit Court, so I'm in the 4 courts now. But in the Children's Court is effectively the same as the District Court, except that it is designed solely for children under the age of 18 years if they are in conflict with the law. Now, we have in juvenile justice in Ireland a very, very comprehensive criminal justice system, which is under the Children's Act 2001. And that's in compliance with international law. So international law is really with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. So if I'm referring to that, it's big long words, so I simply say CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child. And you probably have heard of the Convention on the Human Rights. And in 1948, after the Second World War, well, the CRC is one of those 9 great conventions which every country in the world, bar the United States, has signed up to.
The second question then arising is, why do I think that there are a disproportionate number of young people in care going through the justice system? For many young people in the care system, and for many young people in the criminal justice system, they have experienced loss, separation, and early life traumatic experiences. It is therefore understandable and inevitable and completely unnecessary that children in the care system find themselves in the criminal justice system. If we look, for example, at the number of young people in the criminal justice system and in the healthcare system who do not have the services and the supports that they require, who do perhaps not have the backup and the necessary therapeutic inputs that meet their welfare needs. For many young people who go through loss and separation, and for many young people who perhaps experience upheaval in relation to accommodation, for example, many of them find themselves in hostile accommodation, in short-term accommodation, and can often experience homelessness. That often exposes them to dangerous and to difficult situations. It's also the position that many young people within the criminal justice system experience those issues as well. And therefore I think it is important to recognise that when we don't meet the welfare needs of young people, whether in the care system or in the criminal justice system, that there would be a disproportionate number of young people who fall into the criminal justice system quite unintentionally, but and often avoidably.
There are a number of possible reasons for this, and one of which has to do with practices within care placements themselves, specifically around residential care. So some of our research would suggest that, some placements operate different policies whereby the Gardaí are called to deal with an issue that if a child was in their own home, the Gardaí wouldn't be called to deal with a particular issue. And this can lead to escalation and young people coming into the system. We also know that young people in care sometimes in these situations have experienced loss and trauma. There are sometimes young people experience difficulties that leads to their involvement in criminal justice contact through, for example, drug use and other kind of behaviours. There's also kind of issues around young people moving around different places and that again exacerbating the situation. So there's a number of reasons, but one of the things that we've identified in the research is that there needs to be a proper look at this within the Irish context, taking on board young people's views about why this might be the case.
Judge, what do you think needs to be addressed to prevent young people in care being involved in crime and the justice system?
I think as adults and parents and as guardians, as carers, we have to be more accepting of children and adolescents, and not just as many adults. That we have to accept that, in fact, adolescents are not children and they're not adults. They are adolescents and they have issues in relation to that. And they are developing not just physically, but they're also developing mentally, and we have to be able to adjust to that.
Jessica's next question is, what do you think needs to be addressed to prevent young people in care being involved in crime and the justice system? That's a really good question, and the answer, of course, first of all, is to say that because you are in the care system, should not and does not inevitably mean that you find yourself in the criminal justice system. I often find that it is the children in the care system and also in the criminal justice system whose welfare needs are perhaps not being met, or they are not getting sufficient levels of support that find themselves in both of those systems. And therefore I think we need to ensure that we take a holistic approach to young people's needs. We need to hear, more importantly and most significantly, their voice. There's no greater expert in a young person's life than themselves. And I think that if we ensured that there are care plans and care supports that assist young people in pathways that mean that in terms of education and training, in terms of mentoring, in terms of therapeutic supports, that has their needs and their voice, that we would see a massive reduction in the difficulties and the challenges that young people face.
Because any child who goes through the juvenile justice system is by their nature vulnerable. So, children come with all sorts of vulnerabilities. I mean, one of the things about adolescence is, and you're coming out of adolescence now, but one of the things that we have discovered in the last 20 years, but particularly in the last 10 years, even less, is that we now know an awful lot about adolescent brain development, scientific development, which we didn't know before. So the child's brains are actually physically developing. And we all thought, more than 20 years ago, we would have put it down to hormones, psychological, not knowing issues, but actually there's a whole brain development. We have to take into account all of those issues. Now, a lot of children who come through the juvenile justice system have issues. They may have mental health issues, they may have addiction issues, they may themselves be subject to abuse, they may themselves be victims. So I don't think it'd be fair to categorize it just children in care as such, but we do have a duty, to look after the best interests of the child. And there is, of course, what we call an interface. There's an overlap between children in care and children in the court system, but we try and manage that as best we can.
I think there needs to be a proper look at this at a national level. So we know from our research that this is an issue. We know it from looking at the detention school, young people in children's detention school. But what we also found in our research is that there's lots of different practices taking place across the country, and that different care homes do different things, different Gardaí areas do different things, and there needs to be a proper policy at the national level about how this issue could be dealt with. It also needs to involve young people's perspectives to understand what it is from a young person's point of view about why these issues occur. So one of the things we recommend is that there needs to be a national policy in this area informed by young people, and also we need to have proper information about how many young people from care come into contact with the justice system. And at the moment, TUSLA don't produce that data systematically, so we don't have a full and accurate picture of that.
Question number 4 is, what do you think we should do to help prevent young people going down a bad path? Again, it's important to realise that no young person wants to find themselves in the criminal justice system. We need to ensure that there are diversionary programmes. We need to ensure that their educational, medical and welfare needs are prioritised. And we need to ensure that people have real choices. We have huge numbers of youth homelessness. Even in terms of social welfare, there are different rates for young people after the age of 18 than those over another age. We need to look very, very significantly and properly at our mental health and welfare and well-being. We need to ensure that in terms of anybody who experiences substance misuse, that they are given the appropriate pathway. There is no youth court equivalent, for example, of the drugs court. and that is a gap that needs to be rectified. But most significantly at all, we need a criminal justice system and a care system that is designed and led by young people rather than agencies who have not experienced loss, separation, trauma and early life suffering. I think that if we listened to young people and acted upon their advices, we would, as I say, find far less numbers of people in the criminal justice system. And that goes for children and young people who are in the care system and those that are not.
What do you think we could do to help prevent young people as a whole from going down a bad path?
Well, I think we have to be understanding from our side. We have to accept children as they are. We have to accept that children have issues. You know, I talk about brain development, but you know, we have learning disabilities. It's no accident to say, and we do have empirical evidence to say this, that you know, 60% of children who would end up in the criminal justice system would have learning disabilities. We would have maybe a quarter of children with mental health issues. Now, as I say, going back to the drugs thing, that's exasperated in relation to that. So we have to be a bit more understanding. From the children's point of view, you know, a good peer group is really important. So if you have a bad peer group, unfortunately, and I can understand it, you know, one of the things we found, for example, is that people will, as teenagers, they will go into peer groups, and that's understandable. We found that actually, believe it or not, if children were engaging, particularly at a high end, with animals such as horses or dogs or whatever who were understanding, they had actually a very good outcome. And the reason we were wondering, why is this so? They don't judge. Dogs don't judge. Horses don't judge. But we as humans probably judge a little bit too much. So probably rich for a judge to be saying that, but that's the reality. So we need to be a little bit less judgmental and a little bit more understanding in relation to it, from both adults and from children's point of view. Getting a decent peer group is really important.
The final question from Jessica is if I have any advice to give to young people to help them make better decisions. I think the first thing to say is that for all young people, we at times have made and do make silly decisions and silly choices. The former President of the United States of America, George W. Bush, once said, "When I was young and immature, I was young and immature." And I think we need to recognize, therefore, that bad choices don't have to be permanent choices. Bad paths don't have to be permanent bad paths. I think it's really important that for any young person who has experience or adverse experiences with Gardaí and with the criminal justice system, realize and understand that there are supports there available for them, that there is nothing inevitable about being in the criminal justice system or remaining in the criminal justice system, and that with the right supports, with the right motivation, and with the best of intentions, we can ensure that different paths lead to better outcomes. It's also very important that young people who do come before the courts, and even those who are convicted of offences, shouldn't have to live their lives with those difficult and bad choices that they may have made being left permanently hanging around their neck. We all know that convictions, whether as a young person or as an older person, can have serious consequences in terms of travel, can have serious and enduring impacts in terms of employment and seeking accommodation and so on. And so it is therefore very, very important that if we can demonstrate that we have turned a path, that those things are not like albatrosses around our neck, and that we can move on and not have to always be reminded or remembered for difficult times.
I think for young people, and other research has shown this as well, that's what's really important in a situation where there is contact with the criminal justice system, for example, through a police interview or going through courts and subsequent to that, is that it's really important that young people have advocates who can represent their views and interests and advise them through these processes. It's really important for anybody who has contact with the criminal justice system, adult or young people, to have proper legal advice and representation. And I think that's particularly important for young people in care also.
Is there any advice that you would give a young person to help to make better decisions?
Well, trust yourself. It's a hard time going through adolescence, but it's a really exciting time. I mean, you don't have all the prejudice that we as adults tend to accumulate going forward. I think you have to be more understanding of yourself. I think you have to accept that you may not know everything, but you have a huge, huge world ahead of you, a huge way forward. And I think, if everyone could support one person, that would make a big difference. Everyone needs a friend. So I would say that, whether that's a parent, whether it's somebody who's a responsible adult, whether it's a sibling, or whether it's just a friend, it makes such a difference. If somebody has somebody to be able to talk to, and that can make all the difference.
And would I be able to ask you another question? How did you get into your line of work?
I kind of fell into it, to be honest. What happened was I was a solicitor for 30 years in practice, and I applied to become a district court judge. And then the then president of the district court asked me, would I mind part-time doing some of the children's court? And then there was kind of saying, well, maybe you're not too bad at it, would you mind staying there? So then I ended up staying there. And one of the things I did find, Jessica, compared to normal criminal work or whatever, you need good cooperation. And there was a great cooperation between myself, the Gardaí, the support services, the Child and Family Agency, or whatever. So I'm proud that we did a few things that were good.
I think it's really important to stress that while there are concerns about young people from care coming in contact with the criminal justice system, that what we also know is that the vast majority of young people in care don't have any contact with the criminal justice system. And I think that's a really important point to highlight also for young people and for the broader public.
Can I thank those very tough and soul-searching questions that have been asked by Jessica? Can I wish you all the very best for today? And can I thank again Jessica for highlighting these really, really important issues, and I hope that you take forward this discussion within EPIC.
I was just going to ask Judge O'Connor if he has anything else he'd like to add to the topic.
No, I'd like to thank you. I found it very interesting. You're very, very good to ask me to be interviewed, and I wish you every success with your studies. I think you're a very dedicated girl. You have a very bright future ahead of you. So congratulations in that regard.
Thank you.
So thank you to John and to Gareth and to Jessica, of course. And we also heard from Dr. Nicola Carr, and Nicola is joining us for the live panel piece. So I'll introduce Nicola fully when we move to there. Hi, Nicola. A couple of, I think, just to take from that into the live panel discussion when we get there, a couple of things that were said. And we have Michelle Martyn. I'll introduce Michelle as well, who'll be joining us now. So maybe before we get into those pieces, we might, hi, Michelle. So because Michelle and Nicola are joining us now for the live panel piece, I'll introduce them first as the first. Dr. Nicola Carr, she's Associate Professor at the University of Nottingham. And Nicola was involved with, as she mentioned, Paula Mayock in carrying out the research piece with the Irish Penal Reform Trust, exploring the overrepresentation of young people with care experience in the criminal justice system. And as I said, that was commissioned by the Irish Penal Reform Trust. And Michelle, who works with the Irish Penal Reform Trust, was involved in that research as well. In fact, I think managed that. Michelle joined the Irish Penal Reform Trust in 2016, and she is a former member of the team at EPIC. So big shout out there, where she worked with us in policy. She also then has a significant, I suppose, background in this, because she is very well qualified in criminology and criminal justice. So we're very, very happy to have both Nicola and Michelle with us for this piece. And before we start, both Nicola and Michelle, just a couple of things from the last piece. I know that everybody made some important points. The ones that jumped out where Gareth said, obviously, it's unnecessary for children in care to enter the justice system. It's not a foregone conclusion. And some of that is because of the lack of support, services and resources available to children when they do suffer significant trauma, maybe have learning difficulties, intellectual disability, which draws them into that system. And Nicola, you yourself pointed to the inconsistency in how policies are interpreted, maybe lower thresholds for children in care in relation to involving guardian situations where they may not be involved, typically, and a review of the system itself. So a lot of what came out from both what you, Gareth, John, were saying, through Jessica's prompting, was that there are systemic issues that have to be addressed, that this often leads to children not only being in care, but entering the criminal justice system, that we have to basically provide the proper supports and services to children. And through that, we can improve the chances that children won't either go into care in the first place or enter the criminal justice system. So would we start maybe with some of the outcomes, because you were both involved in the research on the care system and the criminal justice system. Maybe we might speak to some of the outcomes or recommendations we had from that.
Sure, I can start with that. Thanks, Terry, and to Jessica for posing those really challenging questions, and to EPIC and all the team for the really impressive work that's gone into this webinar series. It's really professionally done, and you can see by the attendees and everything, there's a huge reach to this. Also like to thank IPRT, obviously, who commissioned the research looking at the relationship between care and justice. It's an area that has dominated policy attention in other countries, but hasn't got much coverage in Ireland. I do want to kind of reiterate the point, though, that we made at the end of that short piece, which is that the vast majority of young people in care don't come into contact with the justice system. But nonetheless, there is, evidence that there is cause for concern in terms of overrepresentation. We made a number of policy recommendations in the report, chief of which I would say is that there needs to be a coordinated approach to this. One of the striking things that came out from the research was, we would see evidence of overrepresentation in terms of, the young people who are placed in Oberstown, and Oberstown have done very good work in documenting that. But across the system, that data isn't captured. So, obviously individual social workers will know, hopefully, that, children in their care are in contact with the justice system, but that information isn't collected on a national level. So we can't actually provide an accurate picture of that. And Damien mentioned earlier on, the state acting as corporate parent. Well, if you're acting as parent, you need to know if your children are involved in a system that has repercussions for them. So I think that's one of the main recommendations that we made.
Anything for Michelle?
Thanks, Terry, and thanks, Nicola. And it's great that EPIC are facilitating this conversation. And again, I just reiterate what Nicola said. that it's important to say the vast majority of children and young people in care don't come into contact with the criminal justice system. However, I mean, the pieces there that you showed were really, really informative by the different stakeholders involved in this. And I know from an IPRT perspective, detention should always be a last resort for children. What's really positive now is the fact that Oberstown are publishing data on the characteristics of young people in detention. Unfortunately, 41% of young people in Oberstown have had care experience or had contact with child protection services. And I suppose, as what Angel said in her video, it's not that young people are bad eggs, it's systems failures. So again, we need to look further back at early intervention points. And I know Nicola can talk about the research in terms of the point where services retreat, where a young person may have complex needs. So I think we've been, as Damien and Niall Muldoon were saying, there's been much progress in our youth justice system, and ensuring that detention is a last resort as under the Children Act 2001. But there's a lot more to be done in terms of agencies working together. And again, what Angel said, I think, was very important in her video. You do feel like the problem. A young person in care should never feel like they're the problem. The systems, again, needs to work around young people. So there's lots of positive stuff that Damien said there around involving the young people in decision-making processes, and empowering them to make decisions, and to allow them to be involved in the types of programs that are offered to them. But I think one of the key things, and currently there's a draft youth justice strategy, and one of the key things laid out, the full youth justice strategy should be published soon, but one of the key things in that is around having a statutory duty of agencies to work together to ensure the best interests of the child. So I think that's really important, because again, we see in Oberstown detention characteristics, the number of young people who are out of education. So I think all of the systems, there needs to be that statutory duty to ensure the best positive outcomes for young people at an early stage.
Sure. Thanks for that, Michelle. A couple of things there. The corporate parent thing you mentioned, Nicola, it's a phrase I personally detest, because I think we see far too much corporate and far too little parent in all of that. But one of the things came through, and you just touched on it, Michelle, was that it is systems failures, and we've questions coming in from the attendees on the webinar, and I'd encourage you, if you have questions for the panel, please send them in. But one there is the primary preventative gap, and you talked, Nicola, about a review of the system generally. But one of the participants is questioning, if the money was available, where, from your experience, and this is for you, Michelle, as well, where should the money be put in addressing some of those systems failures? Where should we be investing now to ensure that we don't have the same issues moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, one of the striking comments made by the participants that we interviewed was a comment around complexity, where young people are identified or deemed to have complex needs. They talked about service retreat. People saying, well, they don't fit in this service, and they don't fit in this service. And ultimately, what is left for some young people is the justice system, which, Oberstown can't really close its doors necessarily. People coming in, obviously, it does close its doors. But one of the things that was striking and came up in a lot of issues was about children and adolescent mental health services in particular, and the particular gaps there about access to, services at all levels for the most acute need, but also at the kind of earlier stages where people need referrals to therapy and so on. And I would say also that this issue was compounded by the fact that when you, and Damien spoke to this issue as well, when you have young people in care who maybe moved across different countries, a lot of these services operate on regional or geographical catchment areas, and young people moving then puts them down further down the list. So if I was to kind of have control of any money, I would certainly be looking at provision for child and adolescent mental health services in particular.
And Michelle, you were talking about that wraparound, that interagency, I suppose, multi-agency approach as well. That joined up thinking that's come up in a number of webinars where agencies aren't speaking to each other, so gaps emerge and young people fall through them. Maybe you could talk a little bit more to that.
Definitely, Terry. I suppose, yeah, just in that question, obviously I would be investing in health services and in education as well. And I suppose it's even not just about investment, but it's about rethinking about how we do things, and how the service is child friendly and that young people can engage in those services. So education, it doesn't fit, like, we need to be more creative in the different types of educations that's offered to young people. So I think it's not just about resources, it's about, really thinking through and connecting the dots between the different services. So I suppose it's about, I think the Department of Children maybe should lead on having maybe an interdepartmental working group where we look at the different issues in education and health, and that children in care, even though we say corporate parent, children in care, we, like, the state is the corporate parent for children in care. So children in care should be prioritised in accessing services, and we need to look at this from a human rights and equality perspective as well, in terms of reducing those number of kids that come into contact with the criminal justice system.
One point John O'Connor mentioned in his piece was, he talked about, that whole adolescence and the greater understanding we have now of psychological development of adolescence. And I know a recent piece in NUIG from an American researcher said adolescence continue into late 20s for some people. So effectively, we don't become adults until much later than we thought. In relation to that, how do we provide, and this is one of the questions, how do we support young people moving through the system, particularly after they say exit from Oberstown? I know that would be a question for Damien, but when they exit the system but still have those additional needs, I mean, are the needs system-based or are they young person based? In other words, can we follow that young person and provide the needs? I know at the moment it seems to be system-based, so once they're out of the system, effectively they're lost. Is that a fair statement?
I think, Terry, just to mention, so IPRT also did research on the distinct needs of young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds. And obviously we all know that, a young person at 18 years of age just doesn't become an adult overnight. And that transition period is really, really imperative to support that young person, and that young person still have the opportunity and have, implementation of aftercare, aftercare plan and aftercare supports upon leaving care. So I think there's our research found around the importance of brain and maturity development, and there's much more evidence and much more focus on this now, and it's great to see in the draft Department of Youth Justice strategy that it focuses on 18 to 24-year-olds. So we're working towards an even better youth justice system, because prison can end up deepening offending behaviour. We need to look at appropriate interventions for the 18 to 24-year-olds as well. And in that regard, having a conviction can have a disproportionate impact on a young person's lives. And I mean, I've often heard young people say, that, they haven't got into the work or into meaningful work, because, as I think Jessica in her video said, she wants to be a social care worker, and often vetting, and if you have a conviction that can come against you. But Senator Lynn Ruan's bill, the Criminal Justice Rehabilitative Periods Bill, and the Department of Justice is currently reviewing legislation, and in that bill it focuses around having a distinct approach to 18 to 24-year-olds. So I think that's really an important development, and something that we all need to get behind, because young people, they need the opportunities to have access to education and access to employment, and having a conviction can end up and result in disproportionate punishment where that young person can't move on with their life and have those opportunities. So
Gareth referred to that one mistake, then basically following the young person for the rest of their life, which he feels very unfair and unjust as well. Another question that's come in, and this is coming from a number of people, I just wanted to put it to you both. It's around training. So, there's a question here on the primary preventive gap being education, school, but a one-size-fits-all education system that doesn't address the needs of individual children who have specific needs is one issue. And, should teachers have training in working with children in care? When we dealt with that, Jesse, in the education webinar, but also children with particular needs. The Gardaí, do they need specific training dealing with children in care and criminal justice system? So in terms of the training generally professionals in that wraparound model we were talking about, I mean, what would your kind of feelings be on some of those issues?
I definitely think that there is merit and a need for specific training for professionals to understand, you know, the perspectives of where young people are coming from, why people might be behaving in particular ways, that it might not necessarily be, you know, just symptomatic of a particular situation, but, you know, reflecting people's prior experiences and so forth. So there's always a need for that. I would say in relation to the Gardaí, you know, the Gardaí juvenile diversion program is a good model, you know, in terms of diverting young people from the system, and juvenile diversion officers are, you know, understand young people generally. I don't know if that applies across the Gardaí, and, you know, so somebody calling to a situation isn't necessarily going to be the Gardaí diversion officer to deal with young people. So I think there's specific needs there. One of the things that we picked up, and it touches upon earlier issues that were identified as well, is professionals understanding each other's remit. So the kind of interprofessional training opportunities and understanding the responsibilities of different agencies, I think is really important as well. So certainly training along all those areas would be very important. I saw something as well about, in the questions about, you know, should teachers be telling children about the justice system as well? And I think that there is a kind of educational piece there. One of the points, you know, we tend to, you know, I just think we need to underline it, you know, we still have a very low minimum age of criminal responsibility at age 12 and 10 for serious offences. You know, that contravenes UN Convention guidelines. I would totally support what Michelle is saying there as well about kind of extension of the remit of the justice system for kind of that transition to adulthood. I think that's very persuasive. You have young people in care who, you know, age out of care and then into the adult justice system, which is a very marked difference. And I think that there's scope to look at all those areas as well.
And I know, Michelle, I think Dr. Conor Manley, the Special Rapporteur, is looking at the age of criminal responsibilities.
Yeah, that's right, Terry. Yeah. So in the last Child Protection Rapporteur report, you know, there was a recommendation around raising the age of criminal responsibility to 14 in line with UNCRC, and obviously the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We're currently in the process of Ireland reporting to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So I think we definitely, obviously right now, the age of criminal responsibility is 12, so we need to get in line with our European counterparts. Actually, in some jurisdictions, it's more than 14. I think in Portugal it's 16. So, and one of the, I know in Conor O'Mahony's report, he highlighted what was said in the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and how state parties are encouraged to fix an age limit below which children may not be legally deprived of their liberties, such as 16 years of age. So there's definitely more scope to improve in that context, because again, obviously, you know, what happens during, you know, kids shouldn't be disproportionately punishment. And I just want to go back to the point about training also. I think training is so important, and it's so important for all stakeholders. And what Nicola said, I think, you know, I think there should be joint training between social workers and An Garda Síochána. Maybe, you know, he said, look at the parameters of each and look at the impact that, you know, if a young person ends up in the criminal justice system, what will happen. I also think teachers do need to be trained and not just see a child, you know, to know what's going on with that child, and not to see it have a negative, oh, the child is a bad child. That, you know, we need to look deeper in what's going on for that child.
And just to pick up and expand that point a bit, Nicola, Michelle, if I can, because when we talk about training, we typically think of the professionals that wrap around childcare services, whether it be Gardaí, social workers, social care workers, registered care workers, etc. If we consider, and it goes back to a point that Angel made in the panel piece where she talked about, you know, being moved from family to family, 95–96% of all the children care in this country are in foster care. Continual foster care breakdowns, we know, lead to children sometimes entering the criminal justice system, certainly being re-traumatized or having additional trauma. In terms of, if we consider the foster carers being the primary carers for so many children in care in this country, is there more that we can be done to ensure that they have the proper training supports they need to prevent those multiple placement breakdowns that lead to the trauma that often lead to children entering the criminal justice system? You know, your comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly IFCO took part in the research and around the steering group as well. And it's a very good point to make, you know, that when we see contact with criminal justice system, is, you know, our observation as well was it tends to be kind of residential care. But obviously, to that point, children may have had, you know, lots of foster care placements, as you point out. Also, you have the situation of children entering into care at a later stage, and that sometimes presents particular challenges for them and for the system, which, you know, should be able to accommodate that. But, you know, we know that there are gaps there. So I do think that there is a need to focus on support and training for foster carers as well, certainly. And I know that IFCO and other organisations have been doing that kind of work, but around support and recognising those areas is clearly an issue that could be looked at also.
You
And
feel the same, Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely, Terry. I think foster carers really do need to be supported, and obviously getting the right placement in the first, you know, to match the needs of the child is really important. And that permanency planning is really important. And I also think that there definitely needs to be more supports for kinship carers. You know, that maybe sometimes that they're less focused on, but kinship carers should also have great support. Yeah.
Interesting questions are coming in, and please continue. Even if I don't get, and we can't get to all the questions coming in, we will try and we'll use them to inform ongoing discussion around this issue. One person who's just come in is obviously a young person with care experience, but they've just said that they aged out of care, residential care in 2015, but had been in 14 different placements in that time. And also they think criminality was expected. Everyone that they knew from care, knew from care have passed away or is in prison. So I mean, that's the other side of that. And I suppose that speaks to the issues we're talking about, that we do need earlier interventions, we do need more resourcing, we need more investment in services, and we do need to see children in care as a specific cohort. And this has come up, I think, and I just like your opinion on this. This has come up, you know, over the number of all 5-6 webinars this week, that children in care are kind of not recognized as a specific group with particular needs. They're always seen as other groups. They're children in foster care or they're children in you know, detention. But do we need to think more about the specific needs of children in care, the particular needs of children in care as a specific cohort, in your opinion?
I think so, definitely, Terry. And thanks for that young person leaving that comment, because I think it's really important to hear those who have experienced the system, and that's the only way that really the system needs to change, through listening to those young people and their perspectives. I think there definitely needs to be more of a focus. I said, I think children in care should be prioritised. Sometimes children in care can be doubly disadvantaged. You know, a child in care may have a disability as well, and you know, there's, you know, so there's so many ways. But I think we need to look at it from a human rights and equality perspective, and I think in that regard there might be a positive duty of that children in care are positively discriminated, given that the state is the corporate parent, in terms of accessing and being prioritised for those services, such as access to counselling services, access to education. That would be my view.
And can I ask, is this a multi-agency approach? I mean, Paul Downs in the education, he said, was looking for champions at senior level, decision-making level at government and others. Is this a multi-agency approach? Is there one organisation or entity that should lead this? Is this a government statutory duty to look at this, or how do you feel this would work best? Is it a multi-agency approach with the statutory and the voluntary sector?
That's a key question, Terry. I think the way you see what's happened in Scotland, there's lots of different bodies allocated as the corporate parent, from housing authorities to, you know, like it expands from local to national, and so I think, you know, we need that local and that national. But I think you know, I suppose the Department of Children should be the corporate parents and bring these groups together to, you know, show like the vulnerability of kids in care, and that duty works across the way, that there would be, I suppose, an interdepartmental working group to look at those issues, look at the different policy issues that affect children in care. So say, for example, the Ombudsman for Children there, you know, they published a report on the educational experiences of children in care, and I think that really highlighted as well, just going back to the point about teacher training, it highlighted lower expectations for young people in our care system, and that shouldn't be the case. So we definitely throughout the whole system, from the individual to the systematic, that there is key champions, whether you're a teacher, whether you're working in housing authorities, whether you're working in the department, whether you're working in advocacy. And you know, I know EPIC has been great in advocating for young people on an individual basis. So yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. And finally, I'm prompted for time here, but I want to go back to initial piece, and it's come up again. The voice of the child and young person in developing these systems. Nicola, you know, are we doing enough in that? Do we have enough involvement for children and young people around the systems that are there, you know, to support them? And I know Gareth made the point that these systems are often designed by adults for adults rather than for the children and young people they're trying to serve. What would your opinion be, or what would your advice be on that?
Yeah, no, I was very interested to hear, you know, Damien's presentation as well about how Oberstein have embedded that approach in what they do. I'd speak a bit to the research. You know, we did this research commissioned by IPRT, and we didn't, just because of issues around access, ethics, trying to get a hold of young people that we could speak to for the purpose of the research, we weren't able to do it within the time frame. And, you know, I think that speaks something to some of the challenges sometimes about engagement and how young people, there can be barriers in place for young people participating. I think that the model that EPIC does around youth councils and various different ways of reaching out to young people are really important. But sometimes young people in the most difficult situations, for example, young people who may have contact with the criminal justice system as well, are some of the hardest to hear from, and that's quite possibly a structural issue as opposed to young people not having. I'm sure young people have plenty to say, as we've heard in lots that we've heard today. So I do think there needs to be different and creative ways of engaging with young people around these topics as well. And certainly, you know, I was really struck by Angel's comments about her experiences, and you know, they're really powerful to hear, and the impact on young people of movements or of placements and feeling that it's a personal failure yourself and all those kind of things. Then people can understand people's behavior in those contexts and respond in more appropriate ways. So it's critical to do, and I think we need to do it more.
There's a question coming in here just on funding and resourcing, and we've come back to that. And you know, this has been an ongoing issue, because if we want to increase expectations of young people in care and leaving care in terms of their outcomes, you know, and give the equity they need to get the equality that we're trying to achieve for them, it is around, you know, unfortunately, investment in resources and in terms of money. And this person is making the point again, as we said, you know, does the investment need to go to TUSLA and the statutory agencies? I know that the current CEO and the previous CEO of TUSLA have both complained of being underfunded in terms of the work that they're being tasked to do. I think, you know, a lot of people would accept that. So is it that we're simply not valuing the potential to improve outcomes for children to the extent where we are willing to put the money in that it costs to achieve the results we want to find?
Well, I think so. I think there still needs to be a greater awareness, Terry, as you said. The Ryan reports is one example of that. There's, you know, some recommendations that have still yet to be implemented, particularly around, you know, tracking outcomes for young people leaving care. So undoubtedly, TUSLA does probably need more resources to support children in care. So I would definitely say that. But yeah, we need everybody on the same page to work together for the best interests of the child and to hear the voice of the child in all of this.
Nicola, final comment from you.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I agree with all the points made about interagency working and agencies being resourced. But one of the things that comes across in a lot of the research as well is that young people don't want to have to deal with millions of agencies. They want to have a key contact person. So from my point of view and from what I've, you know, looked at in research, you know, I don't think it necessarily matters what agency that person is from, but as long as there is a responsibility there, I think that's the critical issue. And certainly we saw lots of good practice in terms of third sector or voluntary sector in relation to that as well. So it's about, you know, the kind of wide menu of provision, but also that there is a key individual identified for young people.
Absolutely. We've run out of time, so I need to wrap up. Before I do, a really tough question for both of you. The magic wand question. You have the wand. You can do one thing now that you think would improve things. I know it's a really difficult question, but if you could do that, you could just do one thing, one action, one area to invest in. What would it be for you, Nicola? Start with you.
I think I would have to say enhanced and mental health provision across the board for young people.
Very clear. Thank you, Michelle.
That's a very hard question, Terry, to
I know
answer.
it is. I know.
From yeah, like, I would say that every young person has their aftercare plan implemented, and that the young person's needs, like that young person's need, that every young person's needs are addressed in the individual, you know, so that it's an individual approach.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think the other one that I would throw out there is, it's come up again and again and again, more data, more facts and data, more research into understanding what the issues are so that we can address them in an informed way. I think that's the other thing, investment and more research into that. So I want to thank you both, Nicola and Michelle, for that. We've run out of time. I want to thank everybody who has been online asking questions, making comments and observations. Thank you all. I want to thank also the EPIC team, Peter, Andrea, Adele, who set up this particular webinar, the whole team who set up the webinars. It's been a huge amount of work. And this is the last one that I will present personally. I want to thank everybody who has been involved in this. All of the speakers today, you know, Niall, Gareth, John, Angel, Dylan, Damien. When you start, you always forget somebody. Obviously, both of you, Michelle and Nicola. So everybody who's been involved, I think it's been really, really useful. I've said before, and I'll say again, but this, the intention when EPIC produced these was to begin a conversation, not to have a conversation. So we hope this is the beginning of a conversation around the issues that we're discussing. We hope that more agencies and individuals become involved in these. If you want to continue this or follow up on anything we discussed today, you can contact us at EPIC or any of the presenters if you have contact details for them. But please do continue to think and talk about this. I want to remind everybody Care Day is Friday, the 19th. Again, hashtag Care Day 21 on social media will help us immensely in getting the word out around Care Day and children in care, and the positive of children in care, the fantastic outcomes that we said today, the majority of children in care do have. We're talking about a minority of children in care around these issues, but a significant minority and a very important minority as well. So thank you to everybody. I also, before I finish, want to thank the Department of Children, Education, Disability, Integration and Youth, because they've been very supportive in our conferences previously, in the webinars and in Care Day, and given us support across the board. So I want to acknowledge that and thank them particularly. I want to leave that to today. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it. I wish you a great day, a great care week, and hopefully a great Care Day on Friday for those of you who can participate. So thank you all.
Thanks, Terry, and congratulations to you and all the EPIC team and all the young people. Happy Care Week.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Nicola. Bye-bye.